Namaskar and thanks for joining us here on the Economic Brief, the program that looks at key stories from the worlds of business, finance and economy and contextualizes them from local and global perspectives. On the show today, we look at the potential of India's semiconductor ecosystem that is in the making in a big way. We'll also look at the potential of the space economy that's expected to grow to $1.8 trillion by 2035, with India playing a major role. There's a high price problem with the Mpox vaccines for the African market. And we leave you with an assortment of key business stories of the week. Now, India's semiconductor mission has done a lot to attract investment and put in place a sustainable ecosystem for the semiconductor industry. Firstly, there is 50% financial support for setting up semiconductor manufacturing units, and 1.5 trillion rupees is being invested. That's about $19 billion in semiconductor manufacturing, which is going to create a workforce of about 85,000 skilled professionals. There are several semiconductor fabrication units coming up, and if we look at the map, there are three, as we can see, in Sanand in Gujarat, and one more in Dholera, which is also in Gujarat. That, in fact, is a big one. Taiwan's power chip conductor, some 91,000 crore rupees is going into that. And then there is in Moregaon in Assam. So let's briefly look at some of these units. US's Micron Technology is setting up a unit in collaboration with the governments of Gujarat and India. The total investment is by all three is about $2.75 billion. It's expected to be operational later this year. Then there is Tata Electronics and Taiwan's power chip. They have massive units with about $11 billion in investment. They're coming up in Dholera and Gujarat. It's going to be producing some power management chips, which are, the high voltage, high current applications. And India's Tata Semiconductor Assembly and Test Private Limited is investing about $3.25 billion in Assam for indigenous packaging and testing of semiconductors for automotive EVs, consumer electronics, smartphone segments. Then there's India's Kynes Semicon. It's investing about $500 million in a plant in Sanand as well. And they too are targeting consumer, industrial, automotive and power applications. CP Power India and Renaissance of Japan and Thailand's Star Microelectronics are also investing about $1 billion. They're focusing on semiconductors for power electronics and industrial applications. So clearly we can see that India is ready for various aspects of the supply chain. And Prime Minister Narendra Modi had said that India's semiconductor sector is on the brink of a revolution, and that when chips are down, people can bet on India, because India has diodes where energy flows in both directions. And he said it is India's dream that every device in the world should have an Indian-made chip. The Prime Minister said, our focus, I'm quoting him, is clear: to build a world that keeps moving forward. Let's listen.
भारत में सेमीकंडक्टर मैन्युफैक्चरिंग फैसिलिटी लगाने के लिए 50% सपोर्ट भारत सरकार दे रही है। इसमें राज्य सरकारें भी अपने स्तर पर और मदद कर रही है। भारत की नीतियों के कारण ही बहुत कम समय में 1.5 ट्रिलियन रुपीस से ज्यादा के इन्वेस्टमेंट इस क्षेत्र में भारत में हो चुके हैं।
And joining us on the program, we have a distinguished guest. S. Krishnan is the Secretary in the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. Thank you very much, Mr. Krishnan, for being with us. So, India seems to be building an entire ecosystem, from fabrication to assembling to testing to packaging. What advantages does India have, to make a dent in this already seemingly large market?
I think the key advantage that India has in this segment is really the human resources. The world is looking to India to actually provide the human resources that any scientific segment needs. Any area of technology related production and management requires human resources, and India is probably the best source today in the world in terms of its young population, in terms of those who are trained in STEM areas, and that is the big advantage that India has. In addition, the fact that we are a very large market is very attractive for businesses to come in and establish here. And third, given the present geopolitical situation, there is a requirement to build the resilience of supply chains in key products like semiconductors. And that is where I think India fits in within the overall plan that many companies have to make sure that they build or they contribute to a resilient supply chain for what the world needs.
So how price sensitive are, semiconductors, and to what extent can India start supplying, let's say, to the global south in a big way?
Price sensitivity, it is something which is critical to every electronic device that is used. It is critical to all, of course, the computers, the mobile phones, but in addition, even things we do not associate with semiconductors, things like consumer durables you use in homes, things like all the vehicles today, automotives, and more than that, as you start using more and more electric vehicles, there'll be more chips which are needed to control them. So across, and medical diagnostics, medical devices, so across a variety of applications today, semiconductors are used. And since it is so ubiquitous and essential and an alternate technology has not been found, it is not extremely price sensitive. But what does happen is sometimes in the industry there is overcapacity in certain segments which may bring down the revenue which a particular sector realizes. But otherwise, it is not a very price sensitive segment. But to build a semiconductor, the heavy capital investment required is quite risky, which is why world over, semiconductor units, especially foundries as they're called, or fabrication units or fabs, they're usually built with some form of government subsidy everywhere in the world.
So we see a lot of interest, from the United States, from Japan, from Taiwan, all the major producers. How prepared is India, in a sense, the nursery for the future in terms of our manpower, skilled manpower? And you did mention that that's our advantage to start with. Going forward, because this looks like an area which is growing. It's going to grow, that's the plan, and we're going to become kind of a big player. So how well prepared are we for that?
We are very well prepared. We have to first recognize that in one area of semiconductor, in the entire supply chain, which is design, semiconductor design, India already has about 20% of the global human resources required for that segment. So there are many people who are in universities and colleges in India who are quite familiar with semiconductor design. That is an important element. Where we require more human resources are in the actual manufacture of semiconductors. And that is where we are focusing now to make sure that people are trained in the way that semiconductors are actually manufactured. They would not have had an opportunity to do this earlier simply because there weren't large-scale semiconductor units in the country. Now they will have to get used to that kind of precision manufacturing, and I'm sure the quality of our human resources is such that we would be able to train them very quickly in this space. And that is one of the key focus areas of the India Semiconductor Mission, to make sure that the human resources required for semiconductor manufacture are built up. So that is something we are working on as we speak.
And the market is largely going to be domestic, or is it going to be international?
In all of these, I think we have to look at both a domestic market and an international market. The entire electronic value chain is a global value chain. It moves across different borders. So we will be manufacturing certain kinds of chips which would be required both in India and overseas. And there are certain other kinds of chips which we would have to necessarily import because that would be made in some other country.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Mr. S. Krishnan, Secretary in the Ministry of Information Technology and Electronics. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Moving on then to our next story, India is set to play a significant role in the future space economy, hoping to garner about 8% market share by 2033. Space has the power to transform life on Earth for the better in most respects, even helping us to probably mitigate climate change. And it already helps us in communications, smart devices, navigation, weather forecasting, disaster management, and the like. The global space industry is expected to be worth around $1.8 trillion by 2035.
Space, once considered the final frontier, is now emerging as a potential solution to some of the world's most pressing challenges, from climate change to economic distress. This evolving role gives the space economy both purpose and promise. According to forecasts from the World Economic Forum and McKinsey, the global space economy could reach $1.8 trillion by 2035, with the possibility of growing as high as $2.3 trillion if access to data improves and the costs of space entry decrease. India's space economy too is expected to expand significantly, growing from its current value of around $8.4 billion to $44 billion by 2033. This growth is estimated to capture around 8% of the global space market, driven by increased investment, local manufacturing, and a supportive regulatory environment.
Production support industry is already giving, but ISRO want to make them learn the trick of how to build a reliable rocket and launch. That requires knowledge of how things are done, and that can be learned only by working with us.
Satellite technology underpins nearly every smart device on Earth, supporting everything from everyday communications to advanced navigation, disaster warnings, weather forecasting, and defense. Space technology can monitor methane leaks from aging industrial infrastructure and other sources. Companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin are promoting space tourism, making it accessible to the public. Asteroid mining for precious metals and other resources is also on the horizon, potentially offering materials for space construction and valuable resources to bring back to Earth. This emerging field could spur increased competition and innovation.
Competition is always healthy, but the point is that how is it run? How is that competition run? What is the end result of that competition? United Nations feels that space belongs to all humanity. So in that sense, it's not going to be very good to have small pockets who are going to be doing things only for themselves.
Microgravity environments in space offer unique advantages for manufacturing specialized materials and products, including advanced pharmaceuticals and high-precision components. Improved Earth observation capabilities will yield crucial data for environment protection. However, as Rakesh Sharma and other space travelers have noted, the Earth is too precious to be meddled with.
When you see the Earth from space, it has this effect called the overview effect. It makes you respect the Earth more because it's so beautiful. You can see its atmosphere is very thin, and you realize it's an island. So when you live on an island in a vast ocean, you need to take care of it. So I am much more respectful of the Earth.
The space economy is expected to see heightened collaboration between nations and private companies, driving innovation and mutual benefits. But this cooperation must carefully address the constraints or limits of space, like managing debris and preventing its weaponization. The Economic Brief, DD India.
And joining us via Zoom link is Lieutenant General retired Anil Bhatt. He is the Director General of the Indian Space Association. Thank you, General Bhatt. Is there an urgency, to use space more because the Earth is suffering from climate change?
There are two distinct usages of space. One is space for Earth, and that usage has already increased quite a bit. And this is some of what you mentioned for communication, for navigation, in disaster management, agriculture. This is where utilization of space, either by communication or Earth observation or PNT, is being done for enhancing activities on Earth, making it better. While the other part you're talking of is using resources of the space. That is asteroid mining, maybe going to the moon and having habitats there, having microgravity manufacturing in space, and who knows, even providing power to Earth, solar power through solar beams from the, which will be a very clean fuel, far better than the fossil fuel. But in all these activities of use of asteroid mining, of all these activities, there are more disruptions in science which are required. It has to become much more cheaper to bring metals from space. Presently, the cost of a rocket launch and all does not permit it, but in the future, it will happen.
General Butt, how directed, should our priorities be? I mean, in exploiting the potential of space, because it is dangerous after all, and we seem to have a small window to try and utilize it to the best of our abilities.
Oh, yes, of course. Fortunately, thanks to ISRO and India being a spacefaring nation for the last 50, 60 years, gives us a distinct advantage. Within the country, we have a capability of launch vehicles, manufacturing satellites, and all applications in downstream. What the government has now done is, after they announced a new policy in 2020, they have allowed non-government entities, that is private players, startups, also to operate in space. And what is it providing is much more opportunity to make launch vehicles, make satellites, and making India a larger part of the global space economy. We are presently a meager 2.3% of the overall global economy. We aspire to reach 8 to 10%. That is about 44 billion by 2033.
Yes.
And of course, if the McKinsey figures are true, this figure would be far larger.
But, to what extent should private sector space companies use the space? Because should it be regulated in the sense, what extent can private players actually collaborate internationally as well?
So space is still controlled by the main treaty, which is of 1967 vintage. And when there was a strategic competition more for monitoring ballistic missiles. That treaty has held on till today. But now with much more larger number of satellites in space, there needs to be more new regulations internationally accepted to ensure that space does not become congested or contested. And a few initiatives are being taken where they are not formal agreements, but people are moving towards it. Like presently a satellite, after it finishes its life, it goes into the graveyard orbit, or it is just left into the space till the time it dies down. In the future, all nations who are sending satellites to space will have to have a commitment to be able to deorbit it,
okay,
or make it of a material that it self-destroys after it has done its service. Also, there are developments being taken place that on-orbit repairs of satellites can be carried out, that you don't have to send more and more satellites everywhere, and a satellite's life can be increased by providing more power to it, because primarily a satellite dies when the fuel gets over.
So
if
you
it can
say
be
that
refueled, it can live for longer.
So you say self-destruct is the best way to clear the debris?
Yes, or have an ability to come down on its own. After it has had its 5 years or 8 years, it deorbits and comes down to space.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much, General Butt. Thank you for joining us and putting that into perspective for us.
Thank you.
Moving on to our next story, then African countries currently produce less than 2% of the vaccines that they need for the entire continent, in fact. And a hefty price tag, which goes up to $140 per dose, is too much for the average man in Africa for the Mpox vaccine. And many countries have vast stocks of the Mpox vaccines, and they can spare them, but will they? That's the question. The problem is more than pricing, it's actually red tape as well. Anu Kaushik reports.
With nearly 650 deaths since the start of 2024, Mpox is once again wreaking havoc across Africa. The viral disease is endemic to the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is the epicenter of the latest outbreak. Africa is no stranger to Mpox. The disease triggered a public health emergency in the continent in 2022 and 2023. The question now arises, despite having a history, why were measures not taken to prevent another Mpox outbreak in the continent? The answer lies in vaccine inequity. While rich nations like the US and Spain have hoarded crucial doses, countries like Democratic Republic of Congo, Burundi hardly have any. As per 2023 figures, the US has over 7 million Mpox vaccines. Canada and Spain are currently estimated to have over 2 million vaccines, while Democratic Republic of Congo is estimated to have received 200,000 doses in donations from the European Union and the US. For many, this has come as an eerie reminder of the COVID-19 pandemic when poorer nations were facing vaccine shortages.
I think we will be able to contain it if we move fast. I think none of us can afford to go back to a situation where this disease blows out of proportion and causes the harm that COVID-19 did. So we have enough lessons.
Experts have even dubbed this as vaccine appetite. The hoarding of vaccines alone is not an issue. The high cost of the doses poses another challenge. Major producers of the Mpox vaccine are Denmark's Bavarian Nordic and Japan's KM Biologics. The doses they produce cost between $200 to $400. Red tape is also worsening the issue. The slow vaccination approval process by the World Health Organization is preventing Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, and UNICEF from procuring vaccines for Africa. The Economic Brief for DD India.
Well, that's it then on the Economic Brief. And as always, we leave you with the week's top business headlines. Thanks for watching. Namaskar.
SpaceX Polaris Dawn mission scripted history with the first civilian spacewalk. The crew included tech billionaire Jared Isaacman. Thursday was a historic day for India markets. The benchmark Sensex crossing the 83,000 mark for the first time. NSE Nifty surged past over 25,300 points. British firm PricewaterhouseCoopers or PwC has announced its first major layoff in 15 years. It will be firing 1,800 staff in the US. Microsoft will be cutting 650 jobs in its Xbox unit, the third such layoff this year as the company tries to minimize its costs. Europe's top court has upheld a $2.67 billion EU antitrust fine imposed on Google 7 years ago over unfair market practices. Europe's top court has also ordered Apple to pay Ireland $14 billion in unpaid taxes, putting an end to an 8-year row. Meta has announced a slew of new features and programs, including verified badge on WhatsApp Business. Adobe will launch the new generative AI-powered video creation and editing tool in a limited release later this year. MasterCard will buy threat intelligence company Recorded Future from private equity from Insight Partners for $2.65 billion. US holiday sales are expected to grow at their slowest pace in 6 years, data from Deloitte showed, as inflation takes a toll on savings.